Introduction. Throughout history, technology has always promised us glimpses of the future. Some inventions seemed destined to change the world, only to vanish before anyone could hold them in their hands. In this video, we will uncover the stories of futuristic technologies that came close to release, sparked excitement, and then quietly disappeared. Nintendo PlayStation. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, game hardware was moving from cartridges toward optical media. Compact discs promised higher capacity, cheaper duplication, and space for recorded sound and full-motion video. In that transition window, Nintendo and Sony attempted a partnership that, on paper, combined the reliability of cartridge gaming with the storage benefits of CDs. The device that emerged from this collaboration is now known as the Nintendo PlayStation, a Super Nintendo-class machine with an integrated CD-ROM drive designed to run both standard cartridges and a new CD format. It was conceived as an evolutionary bridge rather than a rupture, a careful step into optical storage without abandoning the installed base and developer familiarity of the Super Nintendo architecture. The partnership grew from an earlier technical success. Sony engineer Ken Kutaragi had helped provide advanced audio capabilities for the Super Nintendo, an experience that gave both companies a working relationship and a sense of what each could contribute. The proposed hybrid system, often described internally in terms like SNES-CD or SuperDisc, would let developers keep using the processor, graphics pipeline, and tools they already understood, while moving large assets to disk, orchestral music, lengthy cutscenes, voice acting, and richer backgrounds. It was not a radical redesign of the console. It was an expansion slot made permanent, a CD subsystem integrated into the main board and the industrial design. The aim was straightforward: extend the life of Nintendo's platform and ease the industry into multi-hundred megabyte games without the cost of high-capacity cartridges. From a technical perspective, the machine promised a conservative but practical path forward. Cartridges would handle fast-loading code and timing-sensitive routines. The disk would supply bulk data that could be streamed or loaded with prefetching strategies and buffering. Developers already knew the constraints of the Super Nintendo's memory map and could plan for longer assets, better audio, and larger levels. For publishers, a disk-based print run meant reduced unit costs and the ability to press more copies quickly if a title took off. For consumers, backward compatibility with cartridges would cushion the upgrade, presenting the system as the same trusted console, only with more room for ambitious worlds. The challenge lay less in circuits than in contracts. Optical media demanded a licensing framework separate from the existing cartridge model. With cartridges, Nintendo controlled manufacturing and collected fees on each unit produced. Discs changed the economics: who owned the format, who certified the pressings, who took the licensing share, and who set the rules for copy protection. Early agreements gave Sony significant control over the CD side of the ecosystem, including parts of the licensing pipeline. To Nintendo, careful about platform sovereignty and brand protection, those terms risked ceding leverage to a partner with its own long-term ambitions in consumer electronics. As the legal and strategic implications became clear, alignment fractured. The turning point arrived in public. While Sony spoke about the combined system, Nintendo announced a separate arrangement with Philips for CD technology. The message was unmistakable. The company would not move forward under the original Sony-centric terms. This was not a comment on the feasibility of the prototype itself. It was a business decision about control, revenue, and platform governance. In the wake of that announcement, the joint project lost momentum. Engineering had produced working hardware, but without a shared roadmap, standards package, and licensing playbook, there was no coherent product to ship to stores. The hybrid console existed, but it had nowhere to go. A small number of prototypes survived, the most visible being a unit that resurfaced decades later and confirmed what the documents had described: a Super Nintendo-compatible console with a front-loading CD drive, dedicated audio outputs, and a BIOS expecting a SuperDisc. It was not a speculative mock-up. It was a genuine attempt to fuse cartridge speed with optical capacity. Yet a console requires more than a board and a shell. It needs developer kits, documentation, a library of launch software, manufacturing contracts, retail marketing plans, and a legal framework trusted by publishers. None of that infrastructure could solidify while the two companies pulled in different directions. The reasons for cancellation were therefore structural rather than sensational. Nintendo favored tight platform stewardship, predictable licensing, and evolutionary risk. Sony saw an opportunity to define a disc standard and to grow deeper into interactive entertainment. Those positions were not compatible inside a single product. By stepping away from the terms, Nintendo avoided a future in which it might depend on another corporation to certify a critical part of its software pipeline. By turning its research into an independent console, Sony avoided the constraints of being a component supplier inside someone else's ecosystem. The Nintendo PlayStation, as a commercial device, vanished before release. Its absence is best understood not as failure of engineering but as a boundary around corporate strategy. Had it shipped, it would likely have extended the Super Nintendo's life with larger, cleaner-sounding games and a gradual move toward cinematic presentation. The hybrid would have bought time for developers to experiment with streaming and disc-based workflows while preserving familiar hardware. It would not, by itself, have rewritten the rules of 3D rendering or controller design. It was a bridge, not a leap. Its legacy, however, is profound. Out of the aborted partnership, Sony pursued a standalone console with its own controller philosophy, developer relations program, and third-party licensing model. That console changed market shares, studio economics, and the shape of mainstream game design. Meanwhile, Nintendo continued along a separate path, refining its hardware around distinct identities and first-party craftsmanship. The hybrid machine that never launched became a fork in the road for the entire medium. Viewed in that light, the Nintendo PlayStation is an instrument that tuned the rest of the orchestra by never taking the stage. It concentrated questions of ownership, licensing, and platform vision into a single device and forced two companies to choose what they wanted to be. The prototype sits at the center of a counterfactual, an artifact proving that a joint future was technically possible and strategically untenable. Its disappearance before release is not a footnote. It is a hinge on which the industry turned, quietly, in the space between engineering success and organizational will. Polaroid GL20 Sunglass Camera. At the beginning of the 2010s, Polaroid stood at a crossroads. Once a symbol of instant photography and a household name, the company had struggled to adapt to the digital era. Its iconic instant cameras, which had defined entire decades of casual photography, no longer fit a world where people were rapidly embracing digital point-and-shoots, smartphones, and social networks. Polaroid needed a reinvention, and in 2011, it attempted something that blended fashion, technology, and spectacle. The result was the Polaroid GL20 Sunglass Camera, an unusual hybrid of eyewear and media device that promised to make capturing and sharing moments not only practical but also stylish. The GL20 was unveiled at the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in Las Vegas in January 2011. The launch carried unusual star power. Polaroid's creative director, a role that was as much marketing as design, was the pop culture icon Lady Gaga. At the height of her influence, Gaga embodied eccentric style, futuristic aesthetics, and an ability to draw media attention. The collaboration was strategic. Polaroid wanted not only to showcase a product but to position itself as relevant again in a world where Apple, Sony, and Canon defined consumer electronics. The concept was bold. The GL20 was, at first glance, a pair of oversized sunglasses. The design resembled fashion accessories one might see on a runway or in a music video. Dramatic, angular, with a glossy surface. Yet inside the frame was a small digital camera capable of taking photographs. On the front, in place of standard lenses, the glasses housed tiny OLED screens capable of displaying images. In effect, the wearer could take a photo and then immediately showcase it to anyone nearby by projecting it onto the lenses. The dorky image of traditional wearable cameras was replaced with a more theatrical, performance-oriented presentation. Polaroid described the device as a way of merging instant photography with wearable electronics. Instead of printing an image on paper, the sunglasses themselves became the canvas. The USB port integrated into the design allowed images to be downloaded, shared online, or stored, but the most striking feature was the public display aspect, the ability to show what you had just captured in real time. It was a reinterpretation of Polaroid's original promise of instantaneity, adapted for a digital audience and an exhibitionist age. From a technological perspective, the GL20 raised eyebrows. Embedding a camera, storage, displays, and connectivity into a lightweight frame was not trivial in 2011. Wearable electronics were still rare, and devices like Google Glass would not be announced until 2 years later. The GL20, in that sense, anticipated a trend, the blending of everyday accessories with computational and imaging capabilities. But unlike Google's eventual approach, which emphasized utility, information overlays, and integration with mobile software, the GL20 leaned toward fashion and spectacle. It was not about notifications, navigation, or augmented reality. It was about performance, about turning the act of wearing technology into a visible social statement. Despite its futuristic appeal, the GL20 faced immediate obstacles. First, battery life was a major concern. A device that continuously powered displays on the front of sunglasses and operated a small camera consumed more energy than a lightweight frame could comfortably support. Second, image quality was modest by the standards of 2011. Consumers were already accustomed to dedicated digital cameras producing sharp, detailed photographs, while smartphones were improving rapidly each year. A small lens and sensor hidden in a sunglass frame could not compete. The display resolution, while novel, was limited, making the images more of a visual curiosity than a practical tool. There was also the issue of context. The GL20 was not designed for everyday practicality. The glasses were large, bold, and highly conspicuous. They made sense on a stage, at an art performance, or in a fashion-oriented environment, but far less so in casual daily life. While Polaroid emphasized individuality and style, consumers buying electronics in 2011 were increasingly focused on integration, convenience, and versatility. Smartphones combined camera, display, sharing, and storage in a single pocket-sized device, with no need for a specialized accessory. Even before launch, skepticism grew. Reviewers who saw the glasses at CES questioned whether they were more of an art piece than a consumer product. They noted the reliance on celebrity endorsement, pointing out that Lady Gaga's involvement, while glamorous, could not resolve the engineering compromises. Some saw it as a publicity experiment rather than a sustainable hardware strategy. Investors and analysts, aware of Polaroid's precarious finances, wondered whether resources spent on such spectacles might have been better applied to core digital imaging research. The GL20 ultimately never made it to widespread release. Though presented with excitement at the trade show, and though prototypes were demonstrated, the product failed to reach shelves. Polaroid never announced a formal cancellation, but over the months following CES, the absence of marketing follow-up and the silence from the company made its fate clear. Behind the scenes, production challenges and uncertain demand likely played decisive roles. Manufacturing a novel device with integrated electronics at a consumer-friendly price required scale and engineering polish that Polaroid no longer commanded. The disappearance of the GL20 reflects a larger theme in technology: the gap between spectacle and adoption. A product may generate headlines and capture imaginations, but sustaining it requires an ecosystem of use cases, reliable performance, and market readiness. In 2011, wearable technology was still years away from mainstream acceptance. Consumers were only beginning to adopt smartwatches, fitness trackers, and augmented reality devices. A camera sunglass hybrid, marketed as a fashion object, was ahead of its time in one sense and misaligned with consumer needs in another. Today, the Polaroid GL20 is remembered mostly as a curiosity, a piece of consumer electronics history that surfaced briefly and then vanished. It stands as evidence of how companies, facing pressure to innovate, sometimes chase bold visions that cannot survive the transition from prototype to market. In Polaroid's case, it was an attempt to graft its heritage of instant photography onto a future of wearable media. The effort showed creativity and a willingness to experiment, but it also highlighted the difficulty of rebuilding a legacy brand in the face of rapid technological and cultural change. The GL20 sunglass camera never fulfilled its promise. It existed long enough to be photographed, written about, and discussed, but not long enough to shape the market. Its story is not one of mass adoption or industry influence, but of ambition and timing. Like many futuristic technologies that vanish before release, it serves as a reminder that innovation is not only about what is possible in the laboratory or at a trade show, but also about what consumers are ready to embrace and what companies can actually sustain. In the case of Polaroid's GL20, the gap was too wide, and the product remained an artifact of what could have been, rather than what was. Apple AirPower. In September 2017, Apple stood on stage and revealed a product that seemed to embody the company's philosophy of simplicity and elegance. It was called AirPower, and at first glance it appeared almost too modest. A white, oblong charging mat, designed to sit on a desk or bedside table. But behind its clean appearance lay an ambitious promise. AirPower was meant to wirelessly charge multiple Apple devices at once, without any need for precise alignment. An iPhone, an Apple Watch, and a pair of AirPods could all be placed casually on the surface, and the mat would power them simultaneously. It was Apple's vision of wireless energy as effortless as placing objects on a table. At the time, wireless charging was not new, but it was limited. Most consumer devices used the Qi standard, which required careful positioning on a charging pad. Place a phone slightly off-center, and it would fail to charge. Pads could only power one device at a time, and their efficiency was inconsistent. Apple's AirPower was designed to eliminate those frustrations. It was advertised as a charging mat with a free positioning system. No matter where a user placed their devices, they would receive power. The mat would even display the charging status of each item directly on the iPhone screen, creating a unified experience. The engineering challenge, however, was enormous. AirPower was not a simple Qi charger. To achieve free positioning, Apple planned to integrate a large array of overlapping charging coils into the mat. Unlike conventional chargers that used a single coil, AirPower would contain dozens of them, carefully layered and controlled by sophisticated electronics. The goal was to create a seamless charging field across the entire surface. In practice, this meant dealing with complex electromagnetic interactions, heat management, and firmware coordination. From the moment of its announcement, anticipation was high. Apple showed AirPower alongside the iPhone X, the Apple Watch Series 3, and the new AirPods case designed for wireless charging. The message was clear. This was the future of the Apple ecosystem, a way to unify the growing number of personal devices under one elegant accessory. The product was promised for 2018, and customers expected it to arrive as naturally as any other Apple release. But behind the scenes, difficulties mounted. Reports soon surfaced that the overlapping coils were generating excessive heat. Wireless charging always involves some loss of energy as heat, but in AirPower's design, the interaction of multiple coils amplified the problem. Engineers struggled to keep temperatures within safe limits while maintaining efficiency. The need to prevent interference between coils made the control system even more complicated. Each coil had to be managed in real time, balancing load and alignment detection for multiple devices of different sizes. Months passed without updates. Apple, usually careful about release schedules, remained silent, while industry observers speculated about the delays. Some suggested that the company might scale back features, releasing a simpler mat with fewer capabilities. Others noted that Apple's design standards left little room for compromise. The product had been publicly promised with a specific set of abilities, and anything less would be perceived as failure. By early 2019, rumors intensified that AirPower was in trouble. Analysts reported that prototypes could not meet Apple's internal safety and performance requirements. Heat, reliability, and electromagnetic interference remained unresolved. In March of that year, Apple did something rare. It officially canceled the project. In a short statement, the company admitted that AirPower had failed to achieve its standards and would not be released. For a corporation known for secrecy and polish, the public acknowledgement of cancellation was striking. The disappearance of AirPower before release illustrates the limits of even the most resourceful companies. Apple had attempted to deliver a product that required pushing wireless power transfer beyond what was commercially proven. While the promise was attractive, simple, seamless charging for multiple devices, the technology demanded a level of efficiency and control that available hardware could not provide without unacceptable compromises. For consumers, the cancellation was disappointing. AirPower had been featured prominently in Apple's marketing, creating expectations that it was a near-finished product. Its absence left a gap in the ecosystem, one that third-party accessory makers partially filled with multi-device chargers, though none with the free positioning flexibility that Apple had promised. For the industry, it served as a reminder that innovation is not only about vision and design but also about physics and practicality. In the years since, wireless charging has continued to evolve, but no company has fully replicated the AirPower concept at scale. Apple itself shifted focus, introducing the MagSafe system in 2020, which relied on magnets to align devices precisely with charging coils. MagSafe achieved reliability and efficiency without the technical risks of a coil array, but it also abandoned the dream of truly free placement. In that sense, it was a pragmatic compromise, a solution grounded in what was achievable. AirPower remains a rare case in Apple's history, a product announced with great fanfare and then withdrawn before reaching the public. It symbolizes both ambition and the unforgiving realities of engineering. For all of Apple's reputation for controlling every detail, the AirPower project showed that not every vision can be materialized, no matter how polished the presentation. It exists now as a footnote in the company's timeline, a reminder of a path not taken, and of how even the most carefully designed future can vanish before it arrives. Project Era. In 2013, Google unveiled an idea that promised to redefine the very nature of the smartphone. It was called Project Era, a modular phone platform designed to let users build and customize their devices like assembling blocks. Instead of buying a sealed piece of hardware with fixed specifications, consumers would own a skeleton frame called an endoskeleton, into which they could insert and swap modules. Each module would serve a specific function: a camera, a processor, a battery, additional storage, or even experimental components like medical sensors. It was a vision of a phone that could evolve over time, adapting to its users' needs rather than being discarded every few years. The motivation behind Era was both technical and philosophical. Traditional smartphones were powerful but disposable. Each generation rendered the last one obsolete, encouraging consumers to replace entire devices even when only a single part, such as the battery, was failing. This cycle produced massive amounts of electronic waste. Google's vision was different. With Project Era, a user dissatisfied with their camera could simply replace the module. If a new generation of processors became available, they could upgrade only the central module while keeping the rest of the phone intact. The goal was to extend the lifespan of mobile devices, reduce waste, and democratize customization in a way that echoed the modular nature of personal computers. The technical concept rested on the endoskeleton, a central frame embedded with a standardized data bus. This frame would allow different modules to communicate with each other, powered by a combination of high-speed connectors and a latching mechanism that held each block securely in place. Modules themselves were envisioned as self-contained units, each with its own casing and function. A small store, akin to an app marketplace, would allow third-party developers and manufacturers to design their own modules, broadening the ecosystem beyond Google's internal teams. From the start, Project Era attracted global attention. The idea of a customizable smartphone resonated with users who were frustrated by the sealed nature of modern devices. Tech enthusiasts saw possibilities for creativity, building a phone optimized for photography, or one with extended battery capacity, or even a budget device stripped down to essentials. Google itself highlighted the humanitarian angle. A modular platform could be tailored for developing markets, offering affordable entry-level configurations that could be upgraded gradually, rather than replaced entirely. But behind the inspiring vision lay immense engineering challenges. Modern smartphones are feats of miniaturization, with components carefully arranged to balance power, heat, and space. Separating these components into swappable modules required new approaches to interconnects and power delivery. Latency, signal integrity, and mechanical durability all became concerns. For example, ensuring that a camera module connected through a removable interface could perform at the same speed and quality as one integrated directly onto a motherboard proved difficult. Battery modules had to be hot swappable, demanding systems to prevent power interruptions. Even the physical latching mechanism required innovation. Modules had to be secure enough to withstand daily handling but easy enough for users to swap without tools. Google pressed forward with prototypes. In 2014, it demonstrated early versions of the phone, showing how modules could be attached magnetically and controlled by a central interface. By 2015, more polished versions were shown at conferences, and a limited pilot program was announced for select markets. Developers began experimenting with concepts such as specialized medical sensors, high-fidelity audio modules, and custom hardware for niche professions. The excitement was genuine, and for a brief period, Era seemed poised to usher in a new paradigm of mobile technology. Yet the cracks in the project soon became clear. The prototypes were bulkier than conventional smartphones, raising concerns about practicality. The modular connectors proved unreliable under stress, and the complexity of ensuring compatibility across multiple generations of modules created a logistical burden. Battery and processor modules, in particular, highlighted the limits of modularity. These core components advanced so quickly in the consumer electronics industry that backward compatibility became a moving target. The promise of endless upgradability clashed with the reality of rapid hardware obsolescence. Market forces added further pressure. Smartphone prices were falling, and even budget devices offered increasingly powerful performance. For many consumers, replacing an entire device every few years remained cheaper and simpler than buying individual modules. Manufacturers, too, were hesitant. Building modules for a platform still in flux meant committing resources without guaranteed return. Without a critical mass of third-party support, Era risked becoming a closed ecosystem with limited choice, undermining its founding principle of openness. By 2016, the project was in visible decline. Google scaled back its ambitions, focusing only on integrating core components like processors and batteries into a fixed frame, leaving modularity for less critical features. This shift diluted the concept, moving Era closer to a traditional smartphone with limited customizability. In September of that year, Google officially suspended development. The announcement marked the end of a bold experiment that had captured imagination but failed to translate into a viable consumer product. The legacy of Project Era lies in its ambition. It attempted to challenge the dominant logic of the smartphone industry, where innovation is often tied to annual cycles of replacement. It framed modularity not only as a technical challenge but as an ethical one, tied to sustainability and consumer empowerment. Although it vanished before release, Era influenced discussions about repairability, modular laptops, and sustainable electronics. Its spirit can be seen in efforts like Fairphone, a company dedicated to reparable and upgradable smartphones, though on a much smaller scale. Project Era stands as a reminder that not all compelling visions can survive the constraints of physics, economics, and consumer behavior. Its disappearance before release reflects the difficulty of balancing modularity with the demands of performance, size, and cost. For a brief time, it pointed toward a future where technology could be as flexible as Lego bricks, evolving at the pace of individual needs. In the end, that future remained out of reach, but the attempt itself became part of the story of how innovation sometimes falters. Not because it lacked imagination, but because reality resisted its form. Sega VR. In the early 1990s, video game technology was advancing at a rapid pace. Graphics were becoming more sophisticated, consoles were more powerful, and the gaming industry was eager to experiment with immersive experiences. Against this backdrop, Sega introduced one of its most ambitious projects, Sega VR. Announced in 1991 and formally showcased at the 1993 Consumer Electronics Show, the headset was promoted as the future of home entertainment. It promised to bring players directly into the game world through virtual reality, years before the concept became a mainstream pursuit. The device looked like something out of science fiction. Sleek black goggles with built-in headphones were designed to completely cover the player's eyes, creating the sense of being transported elsewhere. Inside, the headset featured two small LCD screens, one for each eye, which together produced a stereoscopic 3D image. The addition of stereo sound through integrated headphones further deepened the immersion. What set Sega VR apart from earlier experiments in virtual reality was the inclusion of head-tracking technology. Sensors built into the headset would detect the player's movements and adjust the game's visuals in real time, giving the illusion of looking around inside a digital environment. For the early 1990s, this was groundbreaking. Most gamers were still playing on standard televisions with 2D graphics. The idea of putting on a headset and exploring a 3D space felt revolutionary. Sega positioned the device as a mass-market product, with an expected retail price of around $200, making it far more affordable than professional VR systems of the era, which cost thousands of dollars. For dedicated titles were in development, designed to showcase the technology's strengths. Nuclear Rush, a futuristic tank combat game, Iron Hammer, a helicopter shooter, Outlaw Racing, a driving game, and Matrix Runner, a cyberpunk adventure. At demonstrations, Sega VR generated considerable excitement. Attendees were fascinated by the immersive display and the potential it hinted at. In promotional materials, Sega described the device as the next logical step after its popular Sega Genesis console. For a company known for innovation, Sega VR seemed to confirm its reputation for pushing boundaries. Yet despite the hype, Sega VR never reached store shelves. After years of development and multiple showcases, the project was quietly canceled in 1994. The reasons for its disappearance were multifaceted, combining technical challenges, safety concerns, and market realities. One major issue was the performance of the hardware itself. The headset's LCD displays, though impressive at the time, had low resolution and slow refresh rates compared to what was needed for a smooth VR experience. As a result, motion lag and visual artifacts were common. Testers reported dizziness and headaches after short play sessions, symptoms that later came to be recognized as motion sickness induced by VR. While enthusiasts might have tolerated these flaws, Sega worried about widespread consumer dissatisfaction and potential health complaints. Another concern involved the head tracking technology. While the sensors worked, their accuracy and responsiveness were limited by the processing power available in the Sega Genesis. Rendering 3D environments in real time with reliable tracking pushed the hardware beyond its capabilities. The result was a system that felt less immersive than intended, undermining the very selling point of the device. There were also practical problems with ergonomics. The headset was bulky and heavy, making extended gameplay uncomfortable. Adjusting the fit for different users added complexity, and durability became a question as well. Sega had aimed to deliver a consumer product suitable for children and teenagers, but prototypes suggested that the device might not withstand the rough handling common in households. Market forces played a role too. By the mid-1990s, the gaming industry was transitioning toward more advanced consoles, with Sega itself preparing for the Saturn. The company faced stiff competition from Nintendo and Sony, both of which were investing in new hardware. Launching a high-risk peripheral like Sega VR could have diverted resources from its core platforms. In the end, Sega concluded that the potential costs outweighed the likely rewards. The official explanation for the cancellation varied, but Sega often cited safety concerns. The company suggested that the immersive nature of the headset might be too realistic for younger players, raising fears of accidents if users moved suddenly while wearing it. This reasoning, while partly true, also helped cover the more pressing technical shortcomings. Despite never releasing, Sega VR left a cultural imprint. It became a symbol of the era's fascination with virtual reality, embodying both the excitement of the technology's promise and the disappointment of its premature limitations. Enthusiasts who saw the prototypes remembered them as glimpses of a future that arrived decades later. In many ways, Sega VR was ahead of its time. The technology of the early 1990s simply could not deliver the seamless, comfortable experiences that VR required. In retrospect, Sega VR represents the challenges of innovation in consumer electronics. The concept was sound, the ambition was bold, but the execution fell short because the supporting technology had not yet matured. Today, modern VR headsets achieve what Sega once promised, with high-resolution displays, precise tracking, and powerful hardware. Yet the story of Sega VR remains significant, reminding us that even the most futuristic ideas can vanish when they collide with the limits of their time. For a brief moment, Sega VR offered a vision of an alternate future where virtual reality became mainstream decades earlier. Its disappearance highlights the delicate balance between imagination and feasibility in technological development. Though it never reached consumers, it remains a milestone in the history of gaming, a vanished technology that pointed toward a world not yet ready to exist. TALOS, Tactical Assault Light Operator Suit. In 2013, the United States military unveiled an ambitious vision that sounded like it had leapt directly from the pages of science fiction. The project was called TALOS, the Tactical Assault Light Operator Suit, and it was widely described in the media as the Iron Man suit. The idea was to design an advanced exoskeleton for U.S. Special Operations Forces, capable of giving soldiers superhuman strength, enhanced protection, and real-time battlefield awareness. It was a concept that promised to redefine the nature of combat by merging cutting-edge technology with the human body. The TALOS initiative originated from a pressing tactical problem. Special operations soldiers were often required to breach enemy compounds, leading dangerous raids where the risk of gunfire was extremely high. These missions frequently exposed soldiers to fatal injuries before they could even return fire. In 2012, Admiral William McRaven, then commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, SOCOM, called for the creation of a powered suit that would protect operators in these situations. His proposal envisioned a system that could shield soldiers from bullets, enhance their strength and endurance, and integrate advanced sensors to give them a technological edge. The concept immediately captured attention, both within military circles and in the wider public. The notion of American soldiers stepping into armored suits equipped with artificial strength and digital overlays felt like something out of Hollywood. The nickname Iron Man suit stuck, and expectations soared. Unlike a simple body armor upgrade, TALOS aimed to be a complete platform, blending exoskeleton mechanics, ballistic protection, medical monitoring, and communications technology into a single wearable system. The design ambitions were impressive. TALOS was envisioned to feature full-body ballistic protection with advanced armor materials capable of stopping high-velocity rounds, powered exoskeleton components designed to amplify a soldier's strength, allowing them to carry heavy gear, move quickly, and withstand physical strain, embedded sensors which would monitor the operator's vital signs, track stress and fatigue, and even detect injuries in real time. Augmented vision systems such as heads-up displays inside a helmet to provide situational awareness, maps, and targeting information. Onboard computing systems able to process data from drones, satellites, and fellow soldiers, effectively turning the suit into a networked battlefield hub. Medical technologies, potentially including systems to stop bleeding or regulate body temperature, buying soldiers time until evacuation. From the outset, the project was a collaboration among government agencies, private contractors, and universities. More than 50 organizations participated, contributing expertise in robotics, materials science, medicine, and computer engineering. For several years, prototypes and mock-ups were presented at demonstrations, often accompanied by confident statements that a working model would be ready within 5 years. However, as development progressed, the reality of the challenges became clear. Building TALOS meant solving multiple, extremely difficult engineering problems at once. The most immediate obstacle was power supply. To run a full-body exoskeleton, advanced sensors, and computing systems required a lightweight yet powerful energy source. No existing battery technology could provide sufficient power without adding unmanageable weight. While small exoskeletons for medical rehabilitation could function with limited energy demands, scaling up to battlefield conditions proved vastly more complex. Mobility was another problem. Early exoskeletons demonstrated by contractors were bulky and restricted natural movement. Soldiers could not crouch, climb, or maneuver effectively while wearing them. Any system intended for special operations missions had to be agile and responsive, capable of handling unpredictable terrain and close-quarters combat. Yet, the TALOS prototypes often looked impressive in theory but fell short in practice. Armor integration posed additional difficulties. Designing lightweight, flexible, and bullet-resistant materials strong enough to cover the entire body was a monumental task. Traditional body armor protected only vital areas, leaving joints and limbs more exposed. A suit covering everything would be far heavier than a human could carry without assistance. The exoskeleton was meant to compensate for this weight, but with the power limitations, it created a loop of unsolved problems. Despite these issues, development continued through multiple phases. Engineers managed to produce individual subsystems, such as improved helmets with integrated displays and body sensors that monitored vital signs. Exoskeleton legs and arms showed promise in laboratory tests. Yet the fully integrated, battlefield-ready TALOS suit never materialized. By 2019, SOCOM formally acknowledged what had become apparent. TALOS, as originally envisioned, was not achievable with available technology. The project was quietly wound down, with officials stating that while many components had proven useful, the complete Iron Man-style suit would not be fielded. Instead, the research was repurposed into other military programs. Advances in lightweight armor, wearable medical monitors, and partial exoskeleton systems were redirected toward more practical applications, some of which are still in use today. The disappearance of TALOS does not mean the effort was wasted. Like many ambitious projects, it served as a catalyst for innovation. Companies and research institutions pushed forward in fields such as battery design, robotics, and biometrics because of the TALOS initiative. Smaller-scale exoskeletons are now being used for logistics and rehabilitation, and the data gathered from TALOS experiments continues to influence military technology. Yet the broader dream, the image of a fully armored soldier striding into battle with enhanced strength and computer-assisted vision, remains unrealized. The limitations of physics, power generation, and human ergonomics still stand in the way. TALOS was, in essence, a glimpse of a future that had not yet arrived. The project reflects a recurring theme in technological history, ideas that are both visionary and impractical within their era. TALOS was neither a failure nor a success, but something in between, a vanished technology that demonstrated what might be possible someday, without being achievable in its own time. For a brief period, TALOS captured the imagination of soldiers, scientists, and the public. Its story is a reminder that even the most futuristic visions must contend with real-world constraints. Like many ambitious projects before it, the suit never made it beyond prototypes. Still, the effort to build it pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible, leaving behind fragments of innovation that continue to shape the path forward. Lockheed Martin X-33. In the mid-1990s, the United States stood on the edge of what many believed could be the next great leap in space travel. NASA and Lockheed Martin partnered to build a revolutionary spacecraft called the X-33, a prototype designed to demonstrate technologies for a reusable launch vehicle that might one day replace the space shuttle. Sleek, futuristic, and powered by innovative engines, the X-33 was meant to prove that space travel could become faster, cheaper, and more efficient. Instead, it became one of the most prominent examples of futuristic technology that vanished before reaching the skies. The roots of the X-33 trace back to NASA's long-term goal of reducing the high costs of launching payloads into orbit. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Space Shuttle program was showing its limitations. Each launch required months of preparation and carried significant risk, as demonstrated by the Challenger disaster in 1986. To keep America at the forefront of space exploration, NASA began pursuing concepts for a single stage-to-orbit SSTO vehicle, an ambitious design that would launch directly into orbit without the need for detachable boosters or external fuel tanks. The X-33 was chosen as the most promising path forward. In 1996, NASA awarded Lockheed Martin a contract to build the vehicle, with hopes that it would serve as the experimental foundation for a larger, fully operational spacecraft called the Venture Star. The program was announced with great optimism. Unlike traditional rockets, the X-33 would take off vertically, glide back to Earth like an airplane, and be prepared for reuse within days. The goal was to cut launch costs by an order of magnitude, making access to space routine rather than exceptional. What made the X-33 stand out were the advanced technologies it was intended to demonstrate. At its heart were the aerospike engines, an innovation long theorized but never successfully implemented on a large scale. Unlike conventional bell-shaped rocket nozzles, aerospike engines were designed to maintain efficiency at varying altitudes, automatically adjusting to changes in atmospheric pressure. This meant they could perform far better than traditional engines throughout the entire flight profile. If successful, they could revolutionize rocketry. The X-33 also introduced radical design choices in materials and structure. Its body was composed of lightweight composite materials rather than metal, reducing weight while maintaining strength. It featured a lifting body shape, wide and flat rather than cylindrical, allowing it to generate aerodynamic lift and re-enter Earth's atmosphere more like a plane than a falling capsule. This would provide smoother landings and greater versatility. Perhaps the most challenging element of the design was the composite cryogenic fuel tank, built to store liquid hydrogen at extremely low temperatures. Unlike aluminum tanks used on the space shuttle, these composite tanks were meant to be lighter and more efficient. The tanks were integral to the dream of building a craft that could achieve single-stage orbit without staging or discarding components mid-flight. As construction moved forward, excitement built. Prototypes of the Aerospike engines were tested, showing promising results. A full-scale demonstrator of the X-33 began taking shape at Lockheed Martin's facilities. NASA anticipated the first test flights would take place by the early 2000s, ushering in a new era of space access. But as the years passed, the project encountered mounting obstacles. The most severe challenge came from the composite fuel tanks. Despite years of engineering effort, the tanks repeatedly failed under testing. Cracks developed, materials delaminate, and the tanks could not withstand the stresses of cryogenic storage. Without a viable fuel system, the X-33 could not function. Switching back to traditional metal tanks would have added too much weight, making the vehicle incapable of achieving its design goals. At the same time, costs spiraled. The program, initially estimated at under $1 billion, began to consume far more resources than expected. Technical setbacks led to delays, which in turn increased expenses. By 2001, after 5 years of development, the X-33 had absorbed around $1.3 billion without ever conducting a flight test. The political and economic climate had also shifted, with NASA facing criticism for investing in experimental vehicles while other priorities, such as the International Space Station, demanded attention. In early 2001, the X-33 program was formally canceled. The unfinished prototype sat in storage, never taking to the skies. Lockheed Martin's grand vision of VentureStar was abandoned as well, leaving the dream of a reusable single-stage to-orbit vehicle unrealized. Although the X-33 never flew, its legacy remains significant. The program advanced research in composite materials, aerospike engines, and reusable vehicle design. While none of these technologies reached maturity within the X-33 framework, elements of the research have influenced later programs. Modern private space companies, such as SpaceX and Blue Origin, benefit from decades of experimentation, including lessons learned from the failures of the X-33. The story of the Lockheed Martin X-33 is a reminder of the difficulties inherent in pushing the boundaries of technology. Ambition collided with the harsh realities of physics, engineering, and budget constraints. The dream of a sleek, reusable spacecraft capable of flying to orbit and back in a single stage was simply too far ahead of its time. For a brief moment, however, the X-33 symbolized the promise of a bold new future for spaceflight. Its sleek outlines and futuristic engines embodied humanity's desire to make space a place we could reach easily, as naturally as flying across an ocean. That vision has not been abandoned, but it has been delayed. The X-33 stands as one of the most striking examples of futuristic technology that disappeared before it could prove itself, leaving behind only the memory of what might have been. Orbital Science's X-34. In the 1990s, as NASA sought new ways to reduce the cost of space access, the agency pursued several experimental projects under the banner of the Reusable Launch Vehicle, RLV program. One of the most ambitious was the Lockheed Martin X-33, a large single-stage to-orbit demonstrator. Alongside it, however, was a smaller, less publicized but equally promising vehicle, the X-34, built by Orbital Sciences Corporation. The X-34 was conceived as a suborbital technology demonstrator. Unlike the grand vision of the X-33, the X-34's goals were modest but practical. It was designed to test a wide range of technologies that could make reusable spaceplanes possible, from autonomous flight systems to lightweight structures and advanced thermal protection. By focusing on suborbital flights, the X-34 aimed to fly often, gather real-world data, and validate the components needed for future low-cost launch systems. The design of the X-34 was sleek and aerodynamic. It was a small, winged spaceplane measuring about 17 meters in length, far smaller than the Space Shuttle or the projected VentureStar. Weighing roughly 20,000 kilograms when fueled, it was to be carried aloft under the wing of a modified L-1011 aircraft, similar to how Orbital Sciences launched its Pegasus rockets. Once released at altitude, the X-34 would ignite its engine, climb rapidly toward the edge of space, and glide back for an automated runway landing. At its heart was the Fast Track engine, developed by NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. The Fast Track was a low-cost, liquid-fueled rocket engine burning kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing about 60,000 pounds of thrust. It was not designed for orbital missions but rather as an affordable, reliable engine that could power a test vehicle repeatedly without the extensive refurbishment required by the Space Shuttle's main engines. The goal was to validate a propulsion system that could be manufactured at a fraction of the cost of traditional rocket engines. Beyond propulsion, the X-34 carried several innovations. Its structure was built largely from lightweight composites, reducing mass while maintaining strength. Its surface was protected by advanced thermal tiles, similar in principle to those of the Space Shuttle, but redesigned to be more durable and easier to replace. The craft was fully autonomous, capable of completing flights from launch release to landing without a pilot. These features represented the incremental steps NASA hoped would lead to fully reusable launch systems in the future. The program moved quickly in its early years. By 1997, Orbital Sciences had built two X-34 test vehicles, with ground tests proceeding at Edwards Air Force Base. The prototype was impressive to see, resting on the runway like a smaller, futuristic cousin of the Space Shuttle. Engineers performed captive carry tests under the wing of the L-1011, ensuring the vehicle systems could handle the stresses of flight. Expectations grew that the first powered flights would follow soon, marking another step toward NASA's reusable spaceflight ambitions. However, as with the X-33, reality soon collided with optimism. Technical issues began to mount. The Fast Track engine, though innovative in concept, suffered repeated delays and difficulties during development. It never achieved the reliability or performance required to power the X-34. Without a working engine, the test vehicle could only undergo captive and taxi trials, never the full-powered flights that were essential to its mission. Financial pressures compounded the problems. By the late 1990s, the cost of NASA's RLV program had grown significantly, with the X-33 consuming the lion's share of funding. The X-34, though smaller and cheaper, could not escape the shadow of its larger sibling. Resources dwindled, and enthusiasm waned. By 2001, after years of delays and without a single powered flight, the X-34 program was canceled. Two completed X-34 vehicles remained at Edwards Air Force Base. For a time, they were stored and occasionally revisited in studies, but they never flew. Eventually, they were transferred to museums and research facilities, silent reminders of what might have been. The cancellation of the X-34 marked another turning point in NASA's pursuit of reusability. Alongside the end of the X-33, it signaled the closure of the agency's 1990s-era RLV ambitions. The dream of frequent, low-cost access to space would have to wait for a new generation of engineers and companies. Yet the X-34 was not without value. Though it never completed its mission, it contributed to the understanding of lightweight structures, thermal protection, and autonomous landing systems. These technologies would later influence both government and private projects. In many ways, the X-34 foreshadowed the rise of commercial space companies in the 2000s and 2010s, which would eventually succeed where NASA's programs had stumbled. Today, the X-34 stands as a symbol of ambition curtailed by technical and financial limits. It embodied a future where spaceplanes could take off, test, land, and repeat the cycle with ease, bringing space closer to an airline-like model of operation. That vision did not come to fruition in its time, but the X-34's story remains an important chapter in the long pursuit of reusable spacecraft. Like its larger counterpart, the Lockheed Martin X-33, the X-34 was a bold experiment that disappeared before proving itself in flight. Its promise has since been carried forward by others, but the quiet, unfinished airframes remind us of the difficulty of turning visionary technology into working reality. Project Iris. In the landscape of experimental technology, Some projects vanish before reaching the public not because they were unworkable, but because the companies behind them shifted direction. One of the more recent examples is Project Iris, a secretive initiative from Google aimed at creating advanced augmented reality glasses. Announced internally around 2020 and brought into wider awareness in 2022, Project Iris represented Google's renewed attempt to re-enter the AR field after earlier experiments like Google Glass. The vision behind Iris was ambitious. The glasses were meant to be lightweight, stylish, and capable of projecting immersive 3D images directly into the user's field of view. Unlike bulky headsets such as Microsoft's HoloLens or Meta's Quest devices, Iris was intended to look closer to a conventional pair of spectacles. The goal was clear: to make augmented reality practical, portable, and integrated into daily life. At the heart of the project was Google's expertise in software and cloud computing. The device was designed to offload much of its heavy processing to Google's powerful data centers. This approach would allow the glasses to remain small and energy efficient while still delivering complex visual overlays. Through real-time data streaming, users could see translations of text, navigational directions, or digital objects layered seamlessly onto the physical world. The promise was a pair of glasses that would bridge the digital and physical with minimal friction. The hardware itself was to be developed at a dedicated facility in Northern California. Reports described early prototypes as resembling ski goggles, hardly the sleek eyewear that would eventually reach consumers, but a necessary step for testing optics and internal components. Google assembled a large team, including veterans from earlier AR projects, optical engineers, and specialists in machine learning. By 2022, more than 300 employees were reportedly involved in Project Iris, with plans for thousands more to follow if development progressed successfully. Google's timing reflected the growing race in augmented and mixed reality. Meta, then heavily investing in its metaverse vision, was pushing ahead with advanced headsets. Apple, though secretive, was widely rumored to be preparing its own device. Google did not want to be left behind in a field it had once pioneered with Glass. Iris was positioned as Google's chance to reclaim leadership in the wearable computing space, but with a far more refined product. Demonstrations of the technology hinted at its potential. One prototype showed real-time translation, where words spoken in one language appeared as subtitles in another, projected directly into the user's view. Another showcased navigation assistance, guiding the wearer with arrows and markers overlaid onto the road or path ahead. These examples illustrated how Iris could make computing less about screens and more about seamless interaction with the world. Yet, despite the excitement, challenges soon emerged. One was the complexity of the optics. Creating a lightweight pair of glasses capable of projecting bright, high-resolution 3D images that remain clear in varied lighting conditions is among the hardest problems in consumer electronics. Battery life was another hurdle. The more advanced the processing and visuals, the more power the device required, threatening its portability. There were also organizational and strategic obstacles. Google's history with hardware projects has often been uneven, with many initiatives canceled before release. Within the company, Project Iris reportedly struggled with shifting priorities and leadership changes. Resources were reallocated as Google adjusted to broader economic pressures, including cost-cutting measures in 2023 that affected multiple experimental divisions. By 2023, reports surfaced that Google had scaled back Project Iris significantly. Development slowed, prototypes were shelved, and large portions of the team were reassigned. While Google did not announce a formal cancellation, the momentum that had once carried Iris forward had dissipated. The project, once seen as a contender in the AR race, had quietly faded into uncertainty. In retrospect, Project Iris can be seen as both a continuation and a pause in Google's journey toward augmented reality. It demonstrated that the company still believed in the long-term future of wearable computing, but also revealed how difficult it is to bring such visions to reality. Competing demands, technical challenges, and shifting corporate strategies ultimately prevented Iris from reaching consumers. What remains of Project Iris today are fragments of its legacy. Some of its technologies, particularly in visual processing and cloud-based rendering, are likely to reappear in other Google initiatives. The expertise built during the program could inform future AR products, whether in software platforms or in partnerships with hardware makers. But as a standalone device, Iris exists only as a prototype that never crossed into the commercial world. The story of Project Iris illustrates how even the largest and most capable technology companies can struggle when attempting to merge advanced optics, real-time data, and consumer design into one seamless package. For now, Iris joins the long list of futuristic technologies that disappeared before reaching the public, remembered as a glimpse of what could have been, a device that promised to overlay the digital onto reality, only to vanish back into Google's laboratories. TechJect Dragonfly UAV. Among the many futuristic technologies that never made it to the public, the story of the TechJect Dragonfly UAV stands out as a striking example of ambition, innovation, and eventual collapse. It began with a concept that captured imaginations worldwide, a robotic insect that could fly like a real dragonfly, combining the capabilities of a drone with the elegance of nature's own design. The origins of the dragonfly lay in research at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Scientists there had been working on micro-aerial vehicles that mimicked biological flight. Unlike traditional drones with propellers, these miniature machines used flapping wings, inspired directly by insects, to achieve stable hovering and maneuvering. The research demonstrated that such designs could, in theory, offer greater agility, longer flight endurance, and quieter operation than conventional quadcopters. In 2012, a spin-off company called TechJect was formed to bring this research to market. They unveiled the Dragonfly UAV as a revolutionary consumer and professional drone. The design resembled a large robotic insect with 4 delicate wings capable of independent movement. Unlike toy drones, this machine was marketed as a versatile platform for aerial photography, gaming, scientific exploration, and even security applications. Its most appealing promise was endurance. While small quadcopters of the time could fly for only a handful of minutes, TechJect claimed the Dragonfly could fly for as long as 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the configuration. The company's pitch came at the height of the crowdfunding boom. In 2012, TechJect launched a campaign on Indiegogo, promising backers their own robotic dragonflies. The response was overwhelming. The campaign raised more than $1 million, far exceeding its original goal. Thousands of backers pledged money, excited by the possibility of owning one of the most futuristic gadgets ever conceived. The Dragonfly quickly became one of the most famous crowdfunding stories of its time, often cited as proof of how online platforms could bring visionary technologies to life. TechJect offered multiple models, each tailored for different purposes. Some versions were designed for aerial photography, carrying tiny cameras for filming from the air. Others were meant for scientific users, offering the ability to monitor environments or collect data. There were even gaming-oriented versions, which would allow multiple dragonflies to interact with each other in augmented reality scenarios. On paper, it seemed like a drone unlike anything else on the market. But as development continued, cracks began to appear. Building a reliable flapping wing robot was far more difficult than anticipated. The prototypes were fragile, their wings prone to breaking, and their flight control systems unstable. Scaling the laboratory prototypes into consumer-ready devices proved to be a nearly impossible task. While Georgia Tech's research had shown proof of concept, turning that into mass-manufactured products was another challenge entirely. Delays mounted, and updates to backers grew sparse. TechJect released occasional videos demonstrating partial prototypes, but they never showed a fully functional dragonfly capable of meeting the promises made during the crowdfunding campaign. Meanwhile, advances in drone technology outside of TechJect began to outpace the project. Quadcopters were rapidly improving, offering longer flight times, stable cameras, and falling prices. The futuristic vision of a robotic insect was quickly losing its competitive edge against more practical designs. By 2014 and 2015, frustration among backers grew intense. Many began to suspect that the Dragonfly would never be delivered. Reports later revealed that TechJect had faced financial difficulties, disputes over intellectual property, and disagreements with Georgia Tech regarding the transfer of technology. The once promising startup became mired in setbacks, and communication with its supporters nearly ceased. Ultimately, the TechJect Dragonfly UAV was never released. Despite collecting over $1 million in funding, no backer received a working unit. The project is now remembered as one of the most infamous failures in the history of crowdfunding. For some, it serves as a cautionary tale about the risks of backing ambitious technologies before they are ready for mass production. For others, it remains a fascinating glimpse at what could have been. A drone designed not with propellers, but with the grace of nature's own flight. In retrospect, the Dragonfly highlights the enormous gap between laboratory innovation and consumer technology. While the underlying science of insect-inspired flight continues to be explored by researchers, the challenge of building durable, affordable, and efficient robotic insects remains unresolved. The dream of a mass-produced robotic dragonfly that can film, explore, and play remains a vision for the future, not the present. Today, the TechJect Dragonfly UAV exists as a memory of a technological promise that captivated thousands but never materialized. It represents both the allure of futuristic ideas and the reality that some technologies vanish long before they are ready to take flight. Avrocar. In the years following the Second World War, the world entered a period of extraordinary technological ambition. Nations were racing not only to master jet aircraft and rockets, but also to explore radical new concepts of flight that seemed drawn from science fiction. Among these experiments, few captured the imagination as strongly as the Avro VZ9 Avrocar, a Canadian-built flying saucer designed to revolutionize aviation. The Avrocar was the creation of Avro Canada, an aerospace company already known for advanced jet fighters. In the 1950s, Avro engineers, led by British-born designer John Frost, began working on a circular aircraft that could take off and land vertically, hover like a helicopter, and then transition into high-speed forward flight like a jet. The concept was based on the principle of a turbofan lift system, where a central engine would drive air outward to the edges of a disc, creating lift and stability. In theory, this would allow for a compact, versatile aircraft capable of operating in places where traditional runways were unavailable. The idea attracted the interest of the United States military, particularly as the Cold War intensified. Both the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force saw potential in a vehicle that could serve as a flying jeep, a small, fast, and maneuverable craft that could carry soldiers across rough terrain, or even function as a supersonic fighter with hovering capabilities. In 1959, the project received American funding, and the Avrocar officially became the VZ9, a classified military experiment. At first glance, the Avrocar looked like something straight out of a UFO report. It was a flat, circular disc about 18 feet in diameter, with a bubble canopy at the center for the pilot. Beneath the surface, a turbojet engine directed thrust into a circular fan, designed to create vertical lift. The engineering team hoped that once airborne, the craft could tilt and accelerate, transitioning from hovering flight into high-speed horizontal movement. On paper, it seemed like the ultimate hybrid of a helicopter and a jet fighter. However, the Avrocar faced problems from the very beginning. The concept of a circular airframe while striking was difficult to control. During test flights, the craft revealed a dangerous instability at altitudes above a few feet. It tended to wobble uncontrollably, and the airflow around the circular body created unpredictable effects. Engineers tried to compensate with adjustments, but the physics of the design made stable flight almost impossible. Performance was another major disappointment. While initial goals had included supersonic speeds, the Avrocar barely managed to reach 35 miles per hour in forward flight. Its ceiling was equally limited. During most tests, it could only hover a few feet off the ground. At higher altitudes, it lost stability and became uncontrollable. The military had hoped for a futuristic battlefield vehicle, but what they received was a slow, unstable machine that could not safely carry out even basic missions. Despite these flaws, testing continued for several years. Avro engineers made repeated modifications, experimenting with different control systems and engine adjustments. But the basic limitations of the design could not be overcome. The circular airframe was aerodynamically inefficient, and the lift system consumed enormous amounts of fuel for very little performance in return. By 1961, patience had run out. The U.S. military canceled its funding, and the Avrocar program was officially terminated. Only 2 prototypes were ever built, and both ended up in museums, one in the United States, the other in Canada. The Avrocar is remembered today as both a bold experiment and a spectacular failure. It reflected the optimism of the early Cold War, when engineers believed that radical new shapes could unlock the future of aviation. While the craft never achieved its goals, it remains significant as part of the history of vertical takeoff and landing (VTOL) research. In fact, some of the lessons learned from the Avrocar fed into later, more successful VTOL aircraft such as the Harrier jump jet. For the public, however, the Avrocar holds a different kind of fascination. Its unmistakable saucer shape, combined with the secrecy of its development, led to decades of speculation linking it to UFO sightings. Some enthusiasts claimed it was proof that governments were building their own flying saucers. In reality, it was an ambitious but flawed engineering project, one that promised the future but delivered only disappointment. Today, the Avrocar stands as a symbol of unrealized potential. It shows how daring ideas can capture imaginations, even if they fall short in practice. While it never flew as intended, it remains a vivid reminder of an era when aerospace engineers were willing to experiment with concepts that seemed closer to science fiction than to aviation reality. Flying cars by Moller. For as long as humans have dreamed of flight, they have also dreamed of personal flying cars. Machines that would lift off from driveways, soar above crowded highways, and carry their passengers directly to their destination without the need for roads. In the late 20th century, no name became more closely associated with this dream than Paul Moller, a Canadian-born engineer who spent decades trying to create the first commercially viable flying car. His company, Moller International, became famous for ambitious prototypes, bold announcements, and promises that seemed to bring science fiction within reach. Yet, despite more than half a century of work, the dream never materialized. The Moller flying cars remain a powerful example of futuristic technology that vanished before release. Paul Moller's fascination with flying machines began early. Trained as an engineer and aerodynamicist, he was convinced that advances in lightweight materials, compact engines, and computer controls would make it possible to design a small, vertical takeoff and landing vehicle that could be used like a car. His earliest experiments in the 1960s and 1970s included small hovering platforms and single-seat vehicles, but by the 1980s he had set his sights on something far more ambitious: a true personal flying car. The most famous of his creations was the Moller M400 Skycar, unveiled in the 1990s. Shaped more like a small futuristic jet than a traditional automobile, the Skycar had a sleek red body, seating for 4, and a series of duct fan engines designed to provide both vertical lift and forward thrust. Moller claimed that the Skycar would be able to take off vertically like a helicopter, transition smoothly into horizontal flight, and travel at speeds of up to 375 miles per hour, with a range of several hundred miles. It was marketed as a breakthrough that would change urban transportation forever. Moller's vision went beyond the Skycar itself. He imagined entire cities restructured around flying vehicles, with takeoff pads integrated into neighborhoods and software-based air traffic systems that would allow ordinary citizens to pilot advanced vehicles safely. The promise was not just of convenience, but of a transformation of mobility on a global scale. However, the technical challenges were immense. Building a vehicle that could safely hover, transition to forward flight, and cruise efficiently required enormous amounts of power and sophisticated stability controls. The duct fan engines used in the Skycar prototypes were noisy, fuel-hungry, and prone to overheating. Even more critically, the craft's flight control systems were never able to deliver the level of stability and safety needed for everyday use by the public. Test flights conducted in the late 1990s and early 2000s often involved the Skycar tethered to cranes for safety, and the vehicle never demonstrated its full range of promised capabilities. Despite these limitations, Moller and his company continued to promote the Skycar, often holding press events, releasing computer-generated flight demonstrations, and announcing timelines for commercial release. Investors were told that the vehicle was only a few years away from reaching the market. The excitement attracted significant attention, and for a time Moller International was at the center of public fascination with the future of flying cars. But delays stretched into decades. The costs of development mounted into the tens of millions of dollars, while no working product ever appeared. In 2003, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission accused Paul Moller of misleading investors by making exaggerated claims about the readiness of his technology. Although Moller settled the case without admitting wrongdoing, his reputation suffered, and the dream of a sky car seemed more distant than ever. Still, Moller never gave up. Over the years, he introduced several other concepts, including the M200X, a smaller one, or two-seat hovering craft, and later the M600, an updated vision of the sky car. Yet, like the original prototypes, these vehicles failed to progress beyond demonstration models. They could lift off briefly, but they never came close to meeting the ambitious promises of speed, range, and safety that had been advertised. Today, the Moller sky car is remembered as one of the most famous flying cars that never were. It appeared repeatedly in magazines, television programs, and documentaries as a symbol of the future. But the reality was that the technology required to make such a vehicle practical simply did not exist at the time, and, in many ways, still does not exist today. Lightweight, high-power engines, efficient batteries, and reliable autonomous flight controls are all crucial elements for a true flying car, and none were fully developed during the decades when Moller pursued his dream. Yet, the story of Moller's flying cars is more than a tale of failure. It also reflects the persistence of human imagination. For half a century, Paul Moller kept alive the vision of personal aerial vehicles, inspiring countless engineers, futurists, and dreamers to think about what might be possible. Even if the sky car itself never became a reality, it helped shape the cultural expectation that one day, flying cars might exist. In recent years, large companies such as Airbus, Boeing, and several startups have invested heavily in electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, technologies that bear a strong resemblance to the ideas Moller championed. These modern projects benefit from computer automation, lightweight materials, and electric propulsion systems that did not exist when the sky car was first conceived. In this way, while the Moller flying cars vanished before release, their legacy lives on in the ongoing pursuit of personal air mobility. The sky car remains a symbol of what might have been, a futuristic vehicle that promised to liberate people from traffic and reshape cities, but instead became a cautionary tale of ambition outpacing technology. It was a vision too far ahead of its time, and while it never delivered on its promises, it left behind a lasting imprint on the dream of flight. Dyson Electric Car. When most people think of the name Dyson, they imagine high-end vacuum cleaners, bladeless fans, and air purifiers. But in the late 2010s, Dyson surprised the world by announcing its intention to enter one of the most competitive and technologically demanding industries of all, the electric car market. The project was bold, ambitious, and costly, an attempt to create not just another electric vehicle, but one that would stand apart as a symbol of luxury, innovation, and engineering precision. For a brief time, Dyson's car seemed like it might redefine what an electric vehicle could be. And yet, despite years of development and an investment of more than $500 million, the car never reached consumers. Today, the Dyson Electric Car remains a striking example of futuristic technology that vanished before release. The story began in 2017, when Sir James Dyson, the British inventor and founder of the Dyson Company, announced that his team was working on a fully electric vehicle. The plan was to invest more than £2 billion into the project, with half allocated to vehicle development and the other half to building solid-state battery technology, a key innovation Dyson believed could give his car a decisive advantage over rivals like Tesla. Unlike conventional lithium-ion batteries, solid-state batteries promised higher energy density, faster charging times, longer lifespans, and improved safety. If Dyson could be the first to mass-produce them, his company might leapfrog traditional car manufacturers. The project quickly gained momentum. Dyson assembled a team of more than 500 engineers and designers, many recruited from leading car companies, and established a new automotive division. Development facilities were set up in the UK, and plans were made for a manufacturing hub in Singapore. The car itself, internally known as Project N526, was envisioned as a sleek, premium SUV, capable of competing not only with Tesla's Model X, but also with luxury brands like Range Rover and Porsche. By 2019, early prototypes of the Dyson car were complete, and details began to emerge. It was revealed that the car would be an imposing vehicle, 5 meters long, 2 meters wide, and nearly 2 meters tall, with 7 seats and an all-electric powertrain. Powered by Dyson's proprietary solid-state batteries, the SUV was projected to achieve an extraordinary 600 miles, 965 kilometers, of range on a single charge, far beyond what any competitor offered at the time. James Dyson himself even drove a prototype on the company's test track, describing it as a brilliant car with impressive handling and ride quality. But as development continued, the problems became clear. The main challenge was cost. Dyson had hoped that solid-state battery technology would mature in time for mass production, but the chemistry proved more difficult and expensive than expected. As a result, the car had to rely on advanced lithium-ion cells, which increased weight and reduced some of the expected performance benefits. Combined with the vehicle's large size and premium materials, this made it prohibitively expensive to build. Dyson later admitted that the car would have cost more than £150,000 per unit at retail, putting it far beyond the reach of mainstream buyers. The timing also worked against Dyson. By 2019, Tesla had established itself as the leader in electric cars, while traditional automakers like Volkswagen, Audi, and Jaguar were investing billions into their own EV lineups. Entering such a crowded and capital-intensive market would have required Dyson not only to develop a competitive car, but also to build an entire supply chain, service network, and distribution system from scratch. For a company best known for home appliances, this was an immense challenge. In October 2019, Dyson announced that the project was being cancelled. James Dyson explained that while the car was amazing, it was not commercially viable. The company had already spent £500 million on development, and continuing would have required billions more with little chance of profitability. The prototypes were placed in storage, and Dyson's dream of revolutionizing transportation came to an end. Despite the cancellation, the Dyson Electric Car project left a lasting impression. It highlighted both the promise and the difficulty of innovation in the automotive industry. The prototypes demonstrated that Dyson's engineers were capable of designing a vehicle that combined luxury with cutting-edge performance, but it also showed how even the most advanced ideas can collapse under the weight of economic reality. James Dyson himself later reflected that the car was one of his greatest disappointments, though he emphasized that much of the technology developed for the project, particularly in battery research, would continue to influence Dyson's future products. Indeed, the company has since redirected its automotive knowledge toward energy storage, robotics, and next-generation household devices. The Dyson Electric Car stands as a fascinating what-if in the history of modern vehicles. It was a glimpse of a future where solid-state batteries might have transformed electric mobility, where a household brand could have competed with the giants of the automotive world. Instead, it became a reminder that even visionary companies must face the hard limits of cost, scale, and market competition. For now, Dyson remains a name associated with vacuums and fans, not cars. But the ambition behind the project continues to inspire those who believe in pushing technology beyond the boundaries of expectation. Nokia Morph. In the late 2000s, at a time when smartphones were only beginning to reshape the way people interacted with technology, Nokia unveiled a concept that looked decades ahead of its time. Called the Nokia Morph, this futuristic device was introduced in 2008 as part of a collaboration between Nokia Research Center and the University of Cambridge. It was not intended to be a commercial product in the short term, but rather a vision of how nanotechnology might transform mobile devices in the future. The Morph was presented as more than just a phone. It was a concept device, an exploration of what personal electronics could become when materials science and nanotechnology were applied to consumer products. What made the Morph so striking was the way it combined flexibility, adaptability, and advanced functionality into a single elegant design. At its core, the Morph was imagined as a flexible, transparent device that could change its shape to suit different needs. In one moment, it could be stretched into a flat tablet-like surface, ideal for browsing or typing. With a fold, it could be transformed into a compact phone that fit easily into a pocket. The concept video released by Nokia showed the Morph wrapping around a wrist like a bracelet, turning the phone into a wearable device long before the rise of smartwatches. This versatility was made possible by the imagined use of nanomaterials, which would allow the device to be both robust and flexible, while maintaining transparency and responsiveness. Another futuristic feature of the Morph was its self-cleaning surface. By using nanostructured materials that could repel water, dirt, and fingerprints, the device would essentially maintain itself without the need for constant wiping or cleaning. This property was inspired by natural examples like lotus leaves, which use nanostructures to repel moisture. In the Morph, Nokia envisioned surfaces that were not only resistant to everyday wear but also more hygienic, an idea that resonated with the growing importance of personal electronics in daily life. Energy efficiency was another central element of the Morph's design. The concept included solar energy harvesting, where nanostructures embedded in the surface could collect energy from light. In theory, this would allow the device to recharge itself throughout the day, reducing reliance on traditional charging methods. At a time when battery life was already a concern for mobile devices, this feature was especially forward-looking. The Morph was also imagined to have highly sensitive sensors built into its body. These nanoscale sensors could detect environmental conditions, such as air quality or chemical changes in the surroundings. In Nokia's vision, this would enable the phone to become more than a communication device. It could act as a tool for environmental awareness, personal health monitoring, and smart interaction with the world. When Nokia showcased the Morph in 2008 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, it generated considerable attention. The concept video and images captured the imagination of both the tech industry and the general public. It stood as a striking example of how nanotechnology might one day revolutionize consumer electronics, and it reinforced Nokia's image as an innovator at the forefront of mobile technology. However, as with many visionary concepts, the Morph remained more of an inspirational design than a practical product. The technologies it relied upon, flexible transparent electronics, nanoscale energy harvesting, self-cleaning nanostructures, were still largely experimental and decades away from practical implementation. While progress has been made in flexible displays and advanced materials since then, creating a fully functional device like the Morph remains a challenge even today. The Morph also emerged during a critical moment in Nokia's history. In 2008, the company was still one of the largest mobile phone manufacturers in the world, but it was about to face a dramatic shift in the market. The rise of Apple's iPhone and Google's Android ecosystem would soon redefine the smartphone landscape, leaving Nokia struggling to adapt. While the Morph showed what Nokia's engineers were capable of imagining, the company's resources became increasingly focused on competing in a rapidly changing industry. By the early 2010s, Nokia's dominance in the mobile market had faded, and the Morph concept became more of a historical curiosity than a roadmap for future products. Yet, its influence can still be seen in later developments. The rise of foldable smartphones, transparent displays, and wearable electronics all echo elements of the Morph's vision. Though no commercial device ever matched its ambitious combination of features, the Morph helped set the tone for how futuristic design could inspire real-world innovation. Today, the Nokia Morph stands as a symbol of a time when the possibilities of nanotechnology were being eagerly imagined, even if they could not yet be realized. It represents both the creativity of engineers who dared to think far beyond the immediate market and the gap that often exists between technological dreams and practical reality. Like many futuristic technologies that vanished before release, the Morph reminds us that innovation is not only about what can be built today, but also about envisioning the potential of tomorrow. Ending. And so we close our journey through the futuristic technologies that never reached release. Each of them reminds us of how bold ideas can inspire, even if they remain unfinished. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share it with others who might find these stories fascinating. And of course, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for watching and see you in the next story.